The transport ship Silver Dawn glided down through the pale blue skies of Thysera. Captain Rylan Kane stood near the viewing window, his dark eyes fixed on the glittering city below. Tall crystal towers reflected sunlight in sharp flashes. Bridges arched between them like spun glass. The planet looked like a dream, but Rylan knew dreams often hid danger. This was not his first mission to an alien world, but it was his first time acting as personal protector to a royal heir. The Earth delegation had chosen him for his calm, nature, and spotless service record. Humans and Thyserans were not enemies, but they were not friends either. Centuries of misunderstandings had left deep scars. Now, both sides hoped to begin fresh peace talks. The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss, and warm, floral-scented air rushed in. Rylan's small security team followed behind him as they stepped onto the landing platform. Alien guards in shining armor lined the walkway, their expressions unreadable. The light caught on their scaled skin, turning them into living statues. At the far end of the platform stood Princess Serenia Vera, heir to the Crystal Throne. Her silver-blue gown shimmered like water under starlight. Her posture was perfect. Her chin held high. Every move spoke of authority and elegance. Rylan stopped a respectful distance away and bowed his head slightly. "Your Highness," he said in a steady tone, "I am Captain Rylan Kane, Earth Defense Corps. I will serve as your security officer during these talks." Her violet eyes swept over him slowly, and the corner of her lips curved. Not in a smile, but in faint amusement. "So this is the human they have sent to guard me?" she said, her voice clear and cold. "A man wrapped in metal, as if fear itself is your constant companion." The words were sharp enough to cut. Behind Rylan, one of his soldiers shifted, uncomfortably, but Rylan himself didn't flinch. He simply held her gaze. "Armor is a tool, not a crutch," he replied quietly. "It is no different than your palace walls." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Palace walls are a mark of civilization. Armor is the mark of a creature still expecting to be hunted." The alien guards around them exchanged subtle glances, as if wondering how the human captain would answer. Rylan gave none. He merely inclined his head again. "As you wish, Your Highness," he said, his voice calm. "I am here to serve, not to argue." Serenia turned away with a rustle of silk. "Then follow. But do not get in my way." The palace was even more beautiful than the city. Tall halls of crystal and gold stretched upward, filled with soft, shifting light. Music drifted. From somewhere far away, a slow and haunting melody. Rylan kept a few steps behind the princess, his eyes scanning every archway, every shadow. The alien guards walked beside them, but Rylan trusted no one here except his own team. They passed through a garden where trees with silver leaves swayed in a gentle wind. The air smelled of honey and strange spices. Serenia stopped briefly to greet a cluster of robed advisors speaking in her own language. Rylan waited, silent, studying the faces around him. Most of them barely glanced at him. A few, however, studied him with something like open hostility. One of the advisors, tall with golden patterns on his skin, leaned close to the princess and whispered. She laughed softly, casting a glance over her shoulder at Rylan. Though he could not hear the words, he knew they were about him. The tour continued. In the council chamber, sunlight poured through stained crystal, painting the floor in shifting colors. Serenia gestured to the seats where her court would meet with the human delegation tomorrow. "Our fleet will be present in orbit above us," she said with casual pride. "I am told your people will have 3 ships?" "4," Rylan corrected. "Ah, 4. Her tone was light, but the meaning was clear. "Our capital patrol has more than that on a quiet day." Rylan said nothing. He had learned long ago that dignity often came from what you didn't say. They moved on, eventually reaching the wing where Ryland's quarters were located. A guard opened the door for him. Inside, the room was clean and simple, with a desk, a bed, and a small balcony overlooking the gardens. Before leaving him, Serenia paused at the doorway. "Captain Kane," she said, her voice smooth but still edged. "I understand humans value loyalty. I expect you to show it, though I have yet to see if your kind truly understands the word." Ryland gave a small nod. "You will see what you need to see, Your Highness." She studied him for a moment longer, as if trying to read him, then turned and swept away without another word. When she was gone, Ryland removed his helmet and set it on the desk. The weight of her disdain was heavier than the armor itself, but he reminded himself this was not a personal mission. It was for Earth, for the chance at lasting peace. If enduring her cold remarks was the cost, then so be it. Still, something about the way certain courtiers had looked at him stayed in his mind. Not all of it was arrogance. Some of it was calculation. He'd seen eyes like that before, in places where danger lurked behind polite smiles. Later that night, while reviewing his security routes, Ryland noticed a faint shadow move across the balcony outside. He stepped closer, but by the time he opened the door, nothing was there. Only the scent of the strange spices remained on the wind. It was probably nothing. But Ryland had been a soldier too long to believe in coincidences. Somewhere in the palace, Princess Serenia laughed at some courtly jest, unaware that the first signs of trouble had already come. The morning sun poured through the high crystal windows of the palace, scattering light like 1,000 tiny stars. Captain Ryland Kane stood in the main courtyard, checking the readiness of his small team. They were trained, alert, and respectful of Thyceran customs. Still, he could sense the alien guards watching them with quiet disapproval. Princess Serenia arrived moments later, dressed in a flowing white gown lined with silver thread. Her gaze swept over Ryland as though he were simply another piece of furniture in the courtyard. "We begin the tour of the lower city," she announced, speaking to her advisors rather than to him. "The human may follow, at a safe distance." Ryland caught the brief smirk on one advisor's face. He said nothing, simply adjusting the fit of his armor and gesturing for his team to take position. The streets of the city were bustling, full of strange voices, exotic scents, and flashes of alien color. Merchants called out from behind stalls piled with goods that glittered like gemstones or pulsed faintly with inner light. The princess moved gracefully among her people, greeting dignitaries and merchants alike. Ryland stayed several steps behind, scanning the crowd. His training told him to watch for small details, a hand lingering too long near a concealed pocket, eyes that followed too closely. Twice he saw movement in the shadows above, but the figures slipped away before he could get a clear look. During the walk, Serenia stopped before a large open plaza where a crystal fountain sprayed shimmering water high into the air. Turning toward a group of her courtiers, she gestured lightly toward Ryland. "You see how the human wears his armor even here, in the heart of our capital? It is as if he expects the sky to fall at any moment." A ripple of polite laughter ran through the group. Ryland kept his face expressionless, though inside he felt the familiar tightening of restraint. He had dealt with officers worse than her, though none with quite so much elegance in their insults. One of the courtiers, a thin man with gold patterns etched into his cheeks, said loudly, "Perhaps Earth warriors cannot breathe easily unless they are caged in metal." "Perhaps," Serenia replied, her tone smooth and amused. Ryland's second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Holt, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Sir," she began quietly. "Stand easy," Ryland murmured, keeping his eyes forward. As the day went on, they visited the markets, the temple gardens, and the military parade grounds. At each stop, Serenia found some way to remind the crowd that her human protector was an outsider. It was subtle, a comment here, a glance there, but it kept the gap between them wide and clear. In the late afternoon, they reached the sky bridge, a long, narrow span of crystal suspended high between two towers. The view was breathtaking and dangerously open. Ryland's instincts sharpened instantly. He scanned the far end of the bridge, the underside, the surrounding airspace. His helmet display flickered for a moment, registering a small vibration along the bridge's structure. Halfway across, there was a faint cracking sound. Serenia didn't notice, her attention fixed on the horizon where the twin suns were beginning to sink. The crack became a sharp snap. Without a word, Ryland stepped forward, catching her arm just as a section of the railing gave way. She stumbled back into him, startled. "What?" "Bridge damage," Ryland said briefly, pulling her to safety. Two alien guards rushed forward, but by then Ryland had guided her back to stable ground. Serenia recovered quickly, smoothing her gown and her expression. "Merely an old structure," she said to the gathered crowd, as though nothing serious had happened. Nothing to worry about. Ryland didn't correct her. He didn't tell her about the faint scorch marks on the crystal or the way the damage pattern suggested deliberate tampering. He simply logged the details in his helmet and made a note to investigate later. That evening, Ryland returned to his quarters. He removed his armor piece by piece, setting it carefully on the stand. Lieutenant Holt entered, her brow furrowed. "Sir, that bridge," she began. "I saw it," Ryland said, "and it wasn't wear and tear. Should we alert the princess?" Ryland shook his head. "Not yet. She won't listen. We'll watch, gather proof." The palace was quiet, but Ryland felt a tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. He replayed the moment on the bridge in his mind, the sound, the vibration, the timing. Someone had wanted the princess in danger. The question was whether the threat came from outside the palace or from within. The next morning, Ryland joined Serenia again for her official duties. She barely glanced at him, speaking to her aides as though he wasn't there. But he noticed her eyes flick toward him once or twice, quick, measuring looks she didn't seem to realize she was making. In the council chamber, she spoke with pride about Thysera's power, its fleets, and its rich history. "Our armada," she said, "has guarded the Empire for 10 generations. I am told the humans have, what, a dozen deep space warships?" "Closer to 20, Ryland said evenly. Her lips curved faintly. "Ah, 20. Still, an armada you can count on your fingers is hardly an armada at all." A few members of the council chuckled. Ryland simply nodded. "Sometimes a small force can accomplish what a great one cannot," he said. "It depends on how it's used." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than expected before she moved on to other topics. As the meeting ended, Ryland's visor display flashed with a coded message from Holt. "Suspicious movement near Western Palace. Wing. Possible infiltration route." Ryland glanced toward Serenia. She was surrounded by courtiers and guards, her attention far from him. He turned away silently, heading for the western wing. By the time he reached it, the halls were empty. The only sound was the faint hum of the palace's energy lines. He scanned the walls, noting a thin line of disturbed dust near a maintenance hatch. Whoever had been here was gone, for now. He stood in the silent hallway, his jaw set. Serenia might not want his protection. She might even despise it. But Ryland knew one thing for certain. Someone wanted her dead, and he was going to find out who. The palace was quiet at night, but Captain Ryland Kane had learned that quiet often meant trouble. He walked the empty crystal halls alone, the soft hum of his armor systems the only sound that followed him. The day's events stayed in his mind. The bridge sabotage, the suspicious movement near the western wing. It was too much to be chance. Somewhere in this palace, someone wanted Princess Serenia gone. That night, Ryland doubled the guard shifts for his human team and placed motion sensors along the main corridors. The alien guards noticed, but none questioned him openly. Still, he could feel their disapproval, humans preparing for danger in a place they considered untouchable. The next morning, the palace held a council meeting in the grand chamber. Sunlight poured through high-stained crystal windows, filling the room with shifting colors. Serenia sat at the head of the long table, her posture perfect, her eyes sharp. Ryland stood at the edge of the room, silent but watchful. The discussion turned to military strength. One of the Thysaran lords boasted about their navy's unmatched power, speaking as though humans were barely capable of defending their own worlds. Serenia leaned back in her chair and looked at Ryland. "Captain Kane," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber, "your people are known for their bravery. But I wonder, is it the courage of the strong or the courage of the desperate?" Her words hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. Some in the room smirked. Others looked at Ryland with curiosity. He didn't hesitate. "Sometimes desperation wins wars you thought were already decided," he said, his voice calm. The faintest flicker of something, surprise maybe, passed through Serenia's eyes, before her face returned to its usual cool mask. She gave a small nod and turned her attention back to the council. By afternoon, the warm sunlight gave way to a thin gray haze. A soft chime echoed through the halls, a signal for a private ceremony in the Moonlight Court, a place deep in the palace reserved for royal traditions. Serenia would be attending, surrounded by only a few hand-picked guards. Ryland didn't like it. Too isolated. Too many blind spots. But when he voiced his concern, Serenia brushed it aside. "This court has stood for centuries without harm," she said. "I will not change my traditions for imagined threats." "It's not imagination," Ryland replied, but she had already turned away. The Moonlight Court was a wide, open hall with crystal pillars and a glass ceiling that showed the two moons above. Pale silver light poured in, casting soft shadows. A group of robed attendants moved silently as Serenia began the ritual. Ryland stayed near the entrance, scanning the pillars, the rafters, the upper balconies. His visor picked up nothing unusual, until a faint flicker of movement registered behind one of the upper columns. Then it happened fast. A dark figure leapt from the shadows above, gliding down silently with twin curved blades. Ryland moved before thought could catch up, slamming his shoulder into Serenia and knocking her to the floor just as the blades sliced through the air where she had been standing. The alien assassin landed lightly, his black armor blending with the shadows. Without hesitation, Ryland drew his sidearm and fired. The assassin twisted away, one shot grazing his shoulder, and vanished back into the upper levels. The Thysaran guards shouted and scattered, chasing shadows. Ryland pulled Serenia to her feet. "You're hurt?" she asked, her voice sharp, but, for the first time, not mocking. "Not me," he said. He gestured to his armor's shoulder plate, where a deep groove marked the assassin's strike. "Armor held." Her gaze lingered on the damage. She didn't thank him, but her usual dismissive expression was gone. Hours later, Ryland stood in the security chamber with his team, reviewing the attack. The palace's own guard logs were incomplete. The upper balconies had gaps in surveillance, too convenient to be an accident. "This wasn't just an outside job," Holt said grimly. "Someone inside the palace helped them get in and out." Ryland nodded. "They know the blind spots, they know her schedule, and they're not afraid to try again." He thought of Serenia's earlier words, her pride in centuries without harm. That pride was exactly what her enemies were counting on. The next day, Serenia's schedule resumed as though nothing had happened. She walked the palace halls with her usual grace, surrounded by alien guards and trailed by Rylan at a respectful distance. She spoke to her advisors, inspected preparations for the peace talks, and even smiled faintly for the foreign visitors. But now, her eyes occasionally flicked toward Rylan, not with scorn, but with something closer to thoughtfulness. In the afternoon, they passed through the outer gardens, a place of towering crystal flowers and winding paths. The air was heavy with the scent of sweet nectar. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Ryland's sensors picked up a faint energy spike ahead. He slowed his pace, scanning the area. Just as Serenia stepped toward a cluster of white-petaled blooms, a small dart hissed through the air toward her. Ryland moved instantly, his gauntlet snapping up to intercept the shot. The dart hit his armor and fell harmlessly to the ground. Serenia froze, her eyes wide. "Was that poison?" Ryland said, kneeling to examine the dart. The tip was coated with a faint green residue. "Fast-acting, not from your world." "Alien." Guards rushed to surround them, but Ryland kept his gaze sweeping the gardens. Whoever had fired was already gone. That night, Serenia came to Ryland's quarters unexpectedly. She stood at the door, her expression unreadable. "You have been efficient," she said slowly. "Perhaps even more than I expected." Ryland didn't respond right away. "Protecting you is my job, Your Highness, whether you think I should be here or not." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue. "Very well," she said at last. "Continue as you will, but understand this: I will not live in fear." "You shouldn't," Ryland said, "but neither should you pretend there's nothing to fear." She studied him for a moment, then turned and walked away. Ryland watched her go, his mind already turning over the evidence. The enemy had tried twice in 2 days. They would try again, and when they did, he intended to be ready. Morning light spilled into the high windows of the palace training yard. Captain Ryland Kane stood with his human team, going over last-minute security checks for the day's events. Peace talks were only 3 days away, and the number of guests moving through the palace had doubled. That meant more eyes, more hands, and more chances for danger to slip in unseen. The assassin's attacks from the past 2 days were still fresh in Ryland's mind. He had doubled patrols, sealed off blind spots, and even placed his own sensors in areas the Thyceran guards refused to monitor. But the person he was protecting still didn't trust him. Princess Serenia arrived in the courtyard, surrounded by her glittering guard. She was dressed in deep violet today, the color of Thyceran authority. Her chin was high, her steps smooth and unhurried. "Captain Kane," she said in a clear voice that carried across the yard, "I have reviewed your security plans for the royal procession. They are excessive." Ryland kept his tone steady. "With respect, Your Highness, 2 assassination attempts in as many days is not excessive. It's necessary." Her eyes narrowed, slightly. "Your constant suspicion makes my people uneasy. You behave as though danger lurks behind every corner." "It does," Ryland said. "That's why I'm here." The corner of her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "Perhaps Earth soldiers cannot separate reality from paranoia." A few of her courtiers gave soft, approving murmurs at her words. Ryland said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Later that morning, Serenia insisted on inspecting the ceremonial hall alone with her advisors. Ryland followed at a short distance, keeping an eye on the balconies above. The hall was enormous, its crystal walls catching the sunlight and scattering it into a rainbow haze. Rows of empty seats waited for the coming gathering of leaders. At the far end stood the crystal throne, a massive seat carved from a single block of shining quartz. As Serenia stepped forward to examine the decorations, Ryland's visor caught a flicker of movement behind the high curtains. He moved instantly, pushing past a guard and sweeping the fabric aside. only to find an empty ledge. The alien guards bristled at his sudden action. Serenia turned, her voice sharp. "Captain Kane, your behavior grows more disruptive by the day." "I'm not here to be polite," Rylan said. "I'm here to keep you alive." "You assume that without you, I would fall," she replied coolly. "Perhaps you forget that my guards are more than capable." Rylan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Your guards didn't stop the bridge sabotage. They didn't stop the assassin in the Moonlight Court. And they didn't stop the poison dart in the gardens." For a brief second, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps even doubt. But it vanished quickly. "Your tone is out of place, Captain. I suggest you remember to whom you speak." The breaking point came that evening. The royal court was hosting a formal reception for visiting dignitaries. Serenia entered the grand hall wearing a crown of crystal and silver. Rylan stood at his post, scanning the crowd. The alien musicians played soft, flowing melodies, and the air smelled of sweet spices. Halfway through the evening, Rylan noticed a Thyceran noble drifting too close to Serenia. His hand rested suspiciously near the folds of his robe. Rylan moved, in quickly stepping between them. The noble drew back, muttering in his own language, but not before Rylan caught sight of a slim metal tube hidden in his sleeve. Before he could act, the alien guards seized the man and dragged him away for questioning. Rylan turned to Serenia. "That man I saw," she interrupted. But instead of relief or thanks, her voice was cold. "And now half the court has seen you leap to suspicion again. You humiliate me with your constant alarms." Rylan stared at her for a moment, the noise of the reception fading in his ears. All the long days of her cutting remarks, the public insults, the refusal to trust him. It settled into a single solid weight in his chest. He reached up, disengaging the seals on his armor. The hiss of pressure release was loud in the quiet space between them. Piece by piece, he removed the armored plates, laying them gently on the polished floor. Conversations in the hall faltered. The sight of a human soldier removing armor in public drew every eye. Rylan's voice was calm, but it carried. "If my being here is an insult to you, Your Highness, then I'll leave. You have my word I won't trouble you again." Gasps rippled through the crowd. In Thyceran culture, removing one's armor in public was not a sign of surrender. It was a gesture of ultimate trust or final separation. It meant a warrior was walking away from the bond of protection. Serenia's eyes widened. "You would abandon your duty?" "No," Rylan said. "I'm freeing you from it." He turned without another word, his steps steady as he left the hall. His human team glanced at each other in shock, but followed his unspoken command to remain behind. That night, Serenia sat in her private chambers, staring at the crystal walls. Outside her windows, the moons cast pale light across the gardens. She should have felt satisfaction. The human soldier who had irritated her since the day he arrived was gone. But instead, the palace felt empty. Her chief guard entered quietly. "Your Highness, there are whispers of unrest. 2 more suspicious incidents occurred near the southern gates tonight." Serenia looked at the empty space where Rylan would have been standing if he were still on duty. For the first time, she felt the absence not just of his presence, but of the shield he had provided without asking for thanks. The realization was unwelcome, but it stayed with her long after the guard left. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, Rylan Kane was walking away, and with him went the one protector who had never once failed her, no matter how poorly she had treated him. The palace felt colder without Captain Rylan Kane. The grand halls echoed with silence, and the once vibrant gardens seemed less alive. Princess Serenia sat by her window, staring at the 2 moons hanging over Thycera's sky. Her thoughts were restless. She had thought that losing the human soldier's presence would give her freedom, but instead, it brought only fear. For days, she avoided facing the truth. The threats had not stopped. If anything, they had grown worse. 2 nights after Ryland's departure, a loud crash shattered the quiet near the southern gates. Guards rushed to the scene and found part of the ancient wall broken, scorch marks marking the stone like dark scars. The attackers had fled, but the message was clear. The palace was vulnerable. Serenia summoned her chief guard immediately. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice firm but shaken. "Increase patrols and tighten all security." The chief guard nodded, but gave her a look that said even the best efforts could not fill the void left by the human captain. Meanwhile, Ryland walked quietly through a small village on the outskirts of the capital. He had found no rest since leaving the palace. The villagers here had been suffering from recent raids by a band of smugglers, and Ryland lent his skill to help rebuild broken homes and repair defenses. Though far from the palace, news reached him through local channels. The palace attacks continued, and the princess had not asked for his return. Ryland's heart tightened. He had walked away to protect his pride, but now he felt a greater duty pulling him back. Back in the palace, Serenia's confidence waned as another attack came closer to home. One evening, she was in her chambers when she heard a faint hiss. Before she could react, a small dart flew through the open window, barely missing her shoulder. Startled, she drew back and called for help. The dart was examined and found to be coated with a deadly poison, slow but certain. The palace guards searched frantically but found no sign of the attacker. Serenia sat down, her hands trembling slightly. She realized then that her usual pride and strength would not protect her. She needed help. Help she had once scorned. Determined, Serenia sent a message to Ryland through trusted channels. "Captain Kane," the message read, "the palace is no longer safe. Your absence weakens us all. If you still stand by your word, return." Ryland received the message while helping rebuild a broken fence for a family. He paused, staring at the words. His hands were steady as ever, but inside, something shifted. Without hesitation, he packed his few belongings and began the journey back to the palace. When Ryland returned, the palace looked the same. Shining crystal walls, gardens full of color. But the air was heavy with tension. The courtiers whispered, and the alien guards regarded him with mixed feelings. Serenia met him in the great hall, her eyes reflecting relief and apology. "You came back," she said softly. "I was wrong to push you away." Ryland nodded. "I never wanted to leave, but I had to know if you trusted me." "Now I do," she said. From that moment, their partnership changed. Ryland's presence was no longer a burden, but a symbol of strength. Serenia listened more to his advice, and he moved with more freedom to protect her. Together, they began to uncover the threads of the conspiracy that threatened the throne. The crystal throne room was filled with tension. Princess Serenia stood tall, surrounded by her closest advisors and a handful of loyal guards. The air hummed with the quiet energy of an approaching storm, both in the sky and within the palace. Walls. Captain Ryland Kane, now unarmored but alert, moved steadily beside her. He had returned to Thysera not as a soldier simply following orders, but as an ally. His presence gave the princess a quiet strength she had not known before. Word had come that the conspirators behind the attacks were planning their final move. They intended to strike during the opening ceremony of the peace talks, a moment when the palace would be filled with important leaders from many worlds. Ryland and Serenia worked closely to prepare a plan. They knew the conspirators had spies among the court, and some guards were untrustworthy. Trust was rare, but between them it was firm. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Crystals lining the palace halls caught the sunlight, and scattered rainbows across the marble floor. Guests from across the galaxy gathered, their diverse faces showing hope and caution. Serenia wore a gown of shimmering silver, her hair crowned with tiny crystals that caught the light like stars. She moved with grace, but also with determination. Rylan kept close, watching every movement and every shadow. As the ceremony began, Serenia stepped forward to take her place on the crystal throne. The hall fell silent, the crowd waiting for her, speech that would mark a new era of peace. Suddenly, a group of masked figures surged forward from the balconies above, weapons glinting. The attackers struck with speed and precision, attempting to seize the princess. Rylan reacted instantly. Without armor, he threw himself between the princess and the attackers, blocking blades and firing precise shots with his sidearm. The loyal guards joined the fight, but the conspirators had surprise and numbers on their side. Rylan moved with skill and courage, dodging blows and protecting Serenia. He fought not just with weapons, but with heart, showing the kind of bravery that armor could not give. Serenia herself took up a ceremonial staff and fought alongside him, striking down attackers who came too close. Her strength surprised many, both friend and foe alike. The battle raged across the crystal floor, light flashing from broken glass and the sparks of energy weapons. When the last attacker fell, the hall was silent again, except for the heavy breathing of those who survived. Serenia looked at Rylan, her eyes shining with respect and gratitude. "You fought without your armor," she said softly. "That is courage beyond what I expected." Rylan smiled gently. "Sometimes the greatest strength is standing unprotected for what you believe in." The crowd erupted into applause, and Serenia took the moment to declare a new alliance. "Let this day mark the unity of our peoples," she announced, holding up a shard of the crystal throne. "Captain Rylan Kane, protector and friend of Thysera, I honor you with this symbol of our eternal alliance." Rylan accepted the shard, feeling the weight of history in his hands. The princess's gesture was more than ceremonial. It was a promise. In the weeks that followed, human and Thyseran diplomats worked together to build trust and peace. Rylan stayed by Serenia's side, no longer just a soldier but a partner. The story of the human who put down his armor and walked away had changed into the story of the man who returned to stand unarmed, because sometimes true strength comes from the heart, not the shell.